The last time I was with them physically was on the 19th of July 1994. The Nordics, the nice guys, they have a wicked sense of humour. They have a very, very wicked sense of humour. My information, for what it's worth, is that there were about 1,300. It's not that many walking about on the earth who you would not know the difference, because they look like Swedish. It would seem, and this is only a suspicion, it would seem that various people have been going down there to make some kind of negotiation, and mostly been told to go away.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I am here today with Peter Paget, and it's really lovely to have you here, Peter. Peter has spoken at several of my conferences, and this is our first time to sit down and have a one-on-one discussion and an interview with Peter to really talk about his new book. And I read his book, but I read an earlier draft. So now I'm hoping there's nothing in the new version that I'm going to be missing out on, but we can try to catch up here and ask you about all that. So your book is called The Secret Life of a Spook, and you're going to hold it up for us. Excellent. Lovely. And so we're getting that on camera. So, Peter, let me ask you, first of all, did you have a good holiday?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Nice quiet Christmas. And I hope you did too.
I did, and we're here in the UK, and it is the holiday time. We've just had New Year's. I hope you had a good New Year's as well.
Yes, indeed.
Celebrate
I have
properly.
Great optimism for 2017.
Do you?
I really do.
Good. I'm very, very excited to hear that. So far so good, 2017. It's only a few days in, but we're already getting several interviews in the can, as they call it, and so I'm very happy so far. And what I want to do is to start off, I'd like you to give a brief bio. You've worked for Her Majesty's government. That is official, correct?
Yes.
And you've also been, I don't know if you call yourself a spy or a spook. Actually, over the years, you've done that role.
At different times, yes.
Yes. And you've even infiltrated the UFO community, so to speak.
Reported on it.
Okay.
Kindly so.
Okay. Yes. And you yourself you're basically a member at this point, because you've written this wonderful other book about.
I was commissioned back in '78 to produce this book, The Welsh Triangle,
which I think has gotten excellent reviews.
Well, it got excellent reviews. It sold 350,000 copies.
Right.
And the publisher at the time was Granada. It's been published by Granada, Grafton, and HarperCollins Distribution, which are all part of the same group. And they were trying to produce a competitor to the Bermuda Triangle.
I see.
Which is why they actually paid me before I'd written a single word, because I'd been ghosting for them. So they said, could you go down and write a book? And that served also other purposes. So I totally researched that. But we'll come to that later, or do you want to talk about it now?
Well, later, because what I'd like you to do, as I'm saying here, is because you've got a new book out.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure to sort of focus on that.
Sure.
What I want you to do is kind of give yourself some background for the audience.
Yeah. Well, it says on the back here, Peter grew up in the West Country, which is of the United Kingdom. And I was identified at the age of 17 because I actually granted to the British government for free a royalty on a technical innovation to control oil pollution. There was a famous accident. A tanker called Torrey Canyon went on the rocks down in Cornwall, which is on the extreme western point of the United Kingdom. And everyone was panicking about the oil getting on the beaches and killing seabirds and killing the tourist industry. And I'd done some work 6 months prior to this on oil pollution control. And I donated this technique to the British government, which is the oil defence booms. If you see these orange booms, which are floating dams right round, I invented that and gave it to them. They sold it to BP Oil 12 months later for £250,000, when that was a lot of money. And I got another letter of thanks. I got 3 letters of thanks from the Cabinet Office.
But you were actually spotted by them
Yeah.
as being kind of brilliant. And this invention that you did, I think, brought their attention to you as a young boy.
I was headhunted. I was targeted. I didn't know it at the time because I was very young. I was a teenager.
Right.
And people came into my life, which is detailed in the book here in my autobiography. And I was schooled, in effect, in a number of different techniques, including how to fly an aircraft and how to navigate a boat and, all these kind of things that you're supposed to be able to do. Then was commissioned, tasked, as they would say, over different time by many, many different departments. I was principally what is called off-piste, as well, off-camera subcontracting. So I mentioned at the back here that I worked for 5 different constabulary offices in the United Kingdom. We have different constabularies, which are like departments or precincts of police districts, and they all have their own special branch office, which deals with terrorism and things of that nature, rather more serious crimes. And I've worked for 5 of them, including Met, which is our term for the Metropolitan Police, which is London. And I also ended up doing a bit of work for MI5, and a bit of work for GCHQ, which is equivalent to the NSA over there in the States.
Yes, and some would say partners with the NSA.
Yeah, they work very closely together. All of this is what is called compartmentalized. This is a technique which is common to intelligence across the world. So I might be working this desk here, if you want, and the person working the desk next to me doesn't know what I'm doing, and I'm not supposed to ask him what he's doing or what she's doing. Mm-hmm. And everything works in compartments. So some people will know me, some people will remember, some people will say, I've never heard of him. But that is the intention, because everything is divided up into compartments. And the irony of it was I started from the top and worked down. I started working with Sir Zolly Zuckerman, who was the chief scientific advisor at the Cabinet Office in those days, and at the Cabinet Office level. And so I came in at that level, and then things precipitated down to wherever they needed to go. So I was known as being what is called on side, which means that I'm sort of reliable and responsible. And even now, in writing the autobiography, I'm being very responsible. This book has been edited 11 times by various people. Various things have been added, various things have been chopped out. And I say to people, if you find holes in it, well, that's because that was redacted. That was said, no, you can't say that.
Right.
And I do respect, I'm very, very careful and responsible, because, there are people still out there who could be at risk.
Right. And you yourself had a threat on your life at one point,
Several
and
times.
we're going to get to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to do, though, is, weren't you something of a physicist?
Well, I did well at school in physics, and I did go to Birmingham University when computers were very, very young. We were, I think, 3rd generation after Bletchley, which was the establishment that, with the famous machine there, cracked the Enigma German codes. And we were 3rd generation after that, which was a long time ago. And I had to be cleared to do that. We did work for CERN, that's CERN, which is the Swiss physics department. Sure. And also we did work for the British government. We did work for the Vatican, and all kinds of things which were interesting. And also we did run PhDs, research programs, which was also confidential, because a PhD is always nervous of somebody else coming out with their idea one day before they publish, in which case their 3 years of their life is finished. So we did secure work even in those days.
It seems like it wasn't quite that you were going to be a spy or an agent per se. In the early days, you were sort of working in the sciences, right?
Well, I did science at university. In effect, I went to Birmingham, and
right.
I also been to University de Nice, which is in south of France. And I've also done some things at University of Surrey, which is earth sciences. I was just looking at the Earth, but that was when postgraduate, when I was looking at the Earth as if you were looking at an alien planet, and you use Earth satellites to discover things. For example, that we're destroying 1/200th of our tree stock every single year, even now, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's a lot over the years. It builds up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So at what point did you make this sort of I don't know, trajectory into being, a spy, so to speak?
Well, what they do in this country is they identify people who they think have potential,
Right.
and they often go headhunting around universities, and they have various pet professors who actually are tasked to try to identify students who might be suitable. It's moved a long way, and I'm a strong advocate of the old-fashioned ways. I am a dinosaur. I'm 70 now. I'm a dinosaur, but I believe in shoe leather. I believe in in-field work. I believe in getting into organisations. The modern way of doing things, which I am cynical about, is a bunch of geeks, bunch of nerds sitting at their VDU with their cup of coffee in their hand, earwigging all of your emails and telephone calls and everything else, and then doing what we call metadata, which is trying to work out the networks that people have in communications. And with amateurs, I think that works great. But by definition, any true professional would know that that is going on and would not be using those systems in a manner that could be identified or analysed. I've done this myself.
Right.
For example, it's a statement that Osama bin Laden had 49 mobile telephones in use at one time. And all of those can be tracked by GPS to within 1 metre.
Right.
And it is a fact, as I understand it, that no encryption is allowed to be used in the world that the NSA cannot crack. If you can't crack it at the NSA, they won't let it out there. So the idea that you encrypt and it's secure is a fallacy. It might be secure to commercial users or bloggers or hackers, but the reality is that everything can be accessed.
Okay. Yeah. That doesn't surprise me, Edward Snowden notwithstanding. Now, do you actually, may seem a slight departure, but Edward Snowden, do you have any thoughts on that?
He was much higher than has ever been accredited. The story which is outed is that he was a sort of subcontractor and he happened to have access to a lot of high-grade stuff. The reality is, as I understand it, that he had a very high clearance, and therefore he had access to a hell of a lot of stuff. I don't want to comment politically on what he did. I think there are arguments either way. One's former supervisors at the agencies would say, oh my God, he allowed lots of people to have access to things that we didn't want to know, or methodologies. My argument would be that all the agencies know how each other work. And I think the Snowden data is more embarrassing than it was necessarily critical. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese and the English and the French and the Americans all know each other's stuff by definition. You could argue that smaller groups like ISIS or what have you, which are very dangerous but are at a more basic level, may not have the understanding of technical matters that maybe Snowden gave them a few edges. But, pardon me, you could argue that he did inaugurate a lot of transparency, and to the general public they suddenly became aware of the fact that they are being looked at. They've been looked at since 1964. I mean, this is not new. I mean, the idea that it cropped up in the last 5 years is rubbish. I mean, people have been looked at, emails and what have you, have been looked at for decades. It's an open secret. I say I'm not breaching any guidelines here, that certain things are done outside of the United States on the United States general population because it's illegal in the United States, and equally the other way around.
Right.
So, these technicalities of do you need to get permission can be gotten around by administrative wrinkles. That's common knowledge. I'm not breaching any guidelines on that. That's acknowledged.
Sure. Well, I mean, ISIS is also run and financed, though, by the CIA, Saudi Arabia, so on.
I think, if I might answer that in a general way, various agencies over the years have inaugurated certain groups for geopolitical reasons, social engineering, create a problem, offer a solution. And then, regretfully, which has happened with Al Qaeda and with ISIS,
Right.
it's become out of control. You see, when they started in Afghanistan, and Al Qaeda means the toilet in the local dialect, and they tried to incorporate the warlords and the moles, and Osama bin Laden was involved in that on side at that time. Those people are totally mercenary. The idea that these people are working for political, religious reasons is mostly rubbish. They are mostly working for money.
Yes.
ISIS fighters in the field, even as we speak today, I think get $1,500. And I can't remember, I think it's a month, which is a lot of money in those days out there. So what I'm saying is most of these mercenaries work for money. The idea that they're working for religious reasons, yes, they might have a religious angle, but it makes them feel morally more justified if they can say, well, I'm doing this because of my belief. Most of these people are working for money. And you could argue that certain agencies created certain groups, and then it got out of control. It spread out. So now you have cells who you have no knowledge of where they are. You have individual operators who just get kitchen sink operation together. And that is the real danger. When I was working a long time ago and we were dealing with the USSR, you had a central command and you understood where you were. And then the USSR broke up, and you have all of these other republics, what have you, and it's much more difficult to keep tabs on that. And now you have this grassroots threat, real threat, as we've seen recently in Berlin, in Paris, terrible things, total cowardice. I have the worst part. I can't swear on camera to the Americans, but my opinion is so low of people who do things to innocent people. If you're going to take on a country or a regime, take on the military, take on their agents, take on people who can be competent, who are in that. But don't take on a market or children or people. Please, don't get me on my hot
surely you understand that a lot of these are false flags. What we call
well, the false flags only in the sense that they might be set up. Some of them might be set up or allowed to happen.
You've heard of Gladio?
But yeah, I have. But people do get hurt. People do die.
Right, but this is again many times orchestrated from an agency standpoint. In other words, that's really been the research. That's what's out there.
Being fair, and I try to be very fair.
Sure.
I try to avoid cliches.
Okay.
When people talk about any one organization or even any one country, they are not registering that there are many, many different factions, there are many, many different cells, many different compartments, many different agendas. So you can't say the CIA did this or the NSA did that or MI6 did this, because those are very blanket organizations which might have all kinds of units within them that don't even know what each other are doing. And some of those have been pirated by rogue elements who run drugs, who run prostitution, who run other, because it served the purpose. And that started, just to go back, Edgar J. Hoover commented on this, that when the Second World War invaded Italy, the Americans teamed up with the mafia in Sicily to get agents into Italy. And there was a very bad influence of the Sicilian mafia on what then became the CIA. And it's always been there. So they tend to use honey traps and things like that, which is using women and what have you. And I have to again deplore, and I'm old school, I absolutely deplore anything to do with children, paedophilia, these strange things. I cannot relate to anybody who is into that. I just cannot understand it. And it's very regrettable that, of course, if they can get something on somebody,
right,
then that can be used for leverage and blackmail and what have you. But it becomes a dirty business.
Absolutely. So let's back up just a bit here and get into your history, because we were starting down this road where you were brought in as an agent. You were talking about the sort of style at which they're doing it now versus the style at which you were recruited, right?
Yeah, I mean, where I started off too young. I'd become identified at the age of 17 as reasonably sharp, reasonably clever, very reliable. I was.
You're very modest. As I recall, were considered, downright brilliant.
I'm British.
Yeah.
I'm British.
Okay. Well, I mean, no, it's a lovely quality, but I just want our listeners to know that you are.
I have been complimented officially for what is called intelligence excellence.
Yes. There's no doubt about that.
You don't get that without doing something.
Yeah. But, I just wanted to give you credit.
They used me. But you get tasked on a particular remit.
Right.
So I was never the guy who was sitting in a desk on the banks of the River Thames where they say, oh, we've got something going down. I was always out there doing something else where I happened to be in field in a location or situation which was useful. And therefore I just moved sideways into that field. That's the best way of running infiltration. You see, if I might use the parody of the dear old James Bond films, the idea that M calls in Bond, gives him a folder, says, oh, you're now Joe Smith, and go to Tokyo,
right,
is, pardon me, bollocks. That's not the way it's done. There are people who are out there, who are sleepers, who are running their normal lives, who are part of the wallpaper.
Right.
If you want to know what's going in Tokyo, you call Tokyo and you ask someone who is already part of the wallpaper.
Sure, and
because they don't have to be identified.
Asset.
They're called assets. So although the asset thing is sometimes referred to field agents.
That's what I was going to ask you. Because I know that you got into the UFO community, so to speak.
Which I was interested
in. But you were already
anyway.
Sort of in there, in a way, as you are now, as a matter of fact. And you never retire from these kinds of jobs. And so, in essence, you were positioned in a certain way, and then they would use you. And the thing is that, were you playing roles? Aren't you, in a sense, sometimes a bit of an actor in these situations?
I'm quite chameleon. Yes, I'm quite chameleon. I'm a Pisces. I can be quite chameleon. But I have this off-world connection anyway.
Right.
You see, so that I didn't talk about too much.
I want
to
talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. At the age of quite young, I think probably the age of 10, I started having experiences which were really. I'm an only child. I was brought up monastically in a walled garden without any friends. I wasn't allowed friends. My parents had been through the Second World War, and everything out there was hostile and difficult. So I didn't know that my upbringing was unusual. I realised later it was unusual. At the time, I just didn't know. And I had these experiences which were very useful and very intuitive. And I became, at the age of, I think, 16, interested in flying saucers, which was the way it was expressed. My father was very interested, and he got me interested in it as well. And read everything that there was. I mean, I read everything that there was, literally. And also in the occult world, and Blavatsky and Charles Fort, and everything I could. And across the way, Mead Lane. I was a member of the Borderlands Sciences Associates of California, Riley Crabb, Mead Lane, wonderful stuff. So I came in at a totally genuine interest and interviewed a lot of people who had very intimate contacts. I was aware of the abduction thing very early in my experiences. I was, interviewing women who were having phantom pregnancies and were having experiences which they could not explain to their doctor or their husband because people thought they were crazy. But, these were real experiences. And there was a correlation between what they were describing, which they could not possibly have known because they hadn't read the kind of stuff that I'd read and I didn't share. You never lead the witness.
Sure.
You just let them speak, and obviously these people were genuine. They came up with too many random factors which correlated.
Yeah, absolutely. So you already sort of had this. It's almost like having ace in the hole when you start out like that, and then you do get steered into intelligence. But there's also the side that does say that's why they chose you.
that was one of the reasons that they were interested in me, because I had these connections.
Yes.
And it was never in those days required that governments were interested. It was of no defence significance, right? They didn't want to admit that they had any interest, so
Right.
their interest had to be very left of field, very, very camouflaged, and absolutely denied.
Absolutely. Now, you believe you have some contact with Nordics, is this it?
Yeah.
And did the Nordic contact start when you were young,
Yeah.
or did that develop later?
No, that started, I'm aware that started when I was about 10 years old.
Okay. And can you describe what, some incidents, or did you have, did you see beings? Did you have,
Well, the last
there are
time-
Nordics wandering around this country. So did somebody come visit you, in person?
The last time that, working retrospectively, the last time I was with them physically was on the 19th of July 1994. And that was in the middle of the night. It was the time when Shoemaker Levy 9, that comet, was going into Jupiter. It was a warm night, and the windows were all open, and I was in a house by the sea, a wonderful view. We were following all of this amazing impact of the asteroids on Jupiter, which produced huge craters temporarily there. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, I was hauled out of there. I was taken out through the window. This might sound strange. They can do this. The windows were open at the time, but I was taken out through the window, and I contacted then, or had contact then with the principal communicator, who had actually painted a picture the following year in '95. And that was from my memory, the being who I was contacted by.
Fabulous. Mm-hmm.
And that being had been in touch with me in effect for years, but usually just telepathically and visually. And that came through, this is the left of field side of my life, is that a lot of intuitive situations, a lot of arranged situations, meeting people critically at certain times, things happening, me being protected, being avoided from certain situations, some of them life-threatening.
Yes.
The angel sitting on your shoulder. And other people have this as well. It's not exclusive to me. I'm sure you do to a degree.
Yes.
Is that, this kind of otherworldly side to this level of physicality is very, very real. Mm-hmm. It might be denied by the materialist, by the reductionist, but it's there.
Yeah.
You exist before you incarnate into a body. You exist after you biologically die. Their level of being is above this level of being, but also they can translate into and out of. And I've commented on this in my books, that UFO activity is often very transient. Experiences, sightings are minutes, seconds. There's not long periods of time. The long periods of time are quite unusual. Mm-hmm. And the fact that somebody can see something going across the sky and then it vanishes, it doesn't just go, it actually trips out, that's because they can change the frequency of the matter.
Sure.
And they can change. And I've had things drop into my house, actually drop in physically there. Uh-huh. I was doing some lectures in the state of Washington for J.C. Knight's outfit, Ramtha School of Enlightenment. And back in England, they were missing me a bit. And the night before I got home on the red eye on the plane, my wife was sitting in her drawing room like this, which was a big room with like just ordinary carpet, and something fell on the floor out of thin air. There was nothing up there for it to fall from.
Right. And
it was a little square metal piece of rod, really, but a square, not round, but square, broken at one end but machined at the other. And they ran over, picked it and dropped it because it was so hot. It was actually hot. And when it cooled down, they discovered that it was magnetic, and they put it on the fridge, as you do. Waited for when I got home, and when they put it on the fridge, they put it on the fridge here, and in the morning it was here. It had gone up. And then they put it down there and they watched it, and it very slowly, very, very slowly, like watching grass grow, butterflied its way up to the top of the fridge. And when I got home, this was pointed out to me, and I said, I'll look at it, because I was tired. I said, I'll look at it in the morning. I went and looked at it, interesting, put it back on the fridge. And then I went and sat down, got a cup of coffee, and it was a click. It'd gone.
Really?
Gone. Vanished. Nothing there.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a drop in and it dropped out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think that particular
I think
thing?
it was a joke. I found that this kind of ET, the Nordics, the nice guys, they have a wicked sense of humour. They have a very, very wicked sense of humour, and they can create.
All right, fair enough.
Create jokes. They can actually dematerialise things, and particularly metal.
Sure.
There was a helicopter design engineer. It's in the book, and he had similar experiences. He had a lot of technical input on designing helicopters, and they flew extremely well. He was a senior man on design, and he would be doing something at home, doing a bit of DIY. Put a spanner down, metal spanner right in front of him there. Go and look over here. Go and put the bloody spanner's gone. Where's it gone? Vanished.
Yes.
And he'd actually say, "Give it back. Come on, stop me. I need that." And it would, maybe in a minute or two later, he'd look back and it'd come back. They play games. They play games.
Right. Now, is there an Egyptian link up with this particular being?
Yes, I've been told, and I have some knowledge that I believe in reincarnation. I proved reincarnation. I made a film for the BBC on reincarnation.
Oh, right.
Where we took ladies. The ladies were the best subjects under hypnotic regression, and under hypnotic regression, they recalled many different things, which we checked out, which are absolutely accurate. Couldn't have researched it.
Sure.
And I was apparently in the royal house. I was Tut's brother, his elder brother.
Yes, and I also have past life recall. We kind of shared that at one point, but I just get a very Egyptian sort of sense of this being. So the one on the picture. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what I wanted to ask you though, in terms of your contacts, have you ever met, we have some witnesses over the years, we've been doing this for over 10 years now, who have actually reported meeting Nordics that are, they look human and can pass. And so, they've met them here. In fact, a couple in England as well. And they're all over, they can be around. So, and I don't know if you know about my recent interview with William Tompkins, who worked with the Navy. We've got to see it because he's got Nordic contact. He's talking all about it. Mm-hmm. He worked in the aerospace industry. Mm-hmm. He worked for Rand, he worked for Douglas Aerospace, he worked for Lockheed, you name it, and also on the NASA Apollo stuff. So very fascinating guy. At any rate, he also talks about the Nordics being here, being in this reality. In other words, here on Earth, walking around. So have you had that kind of exposure?
Very careful what I say about that. My information, for what it's worth, is that there were about 1,300. Mm-hmm. It's not that many walking about on the Earth. Okay. Who you would not know the difference, because they look like Swedish. They have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they have a rather Swedish type, Germanic type disposition. And I can't say anything about that really, because it might endanger somebody who is in a position that they do not want to be identified in. But they are out there, and they do try to have a positive influence, as indeed so do I. Right. There are others, which we won't go too much into, who have a very negative agenda and have been here a very long time. I mean, this is one of the things that I lecture on, is that you have E.T. who comes in, but you also have other races that have been here for a very long time. I would argue before even human beings, because human beings actually are only 250,000 years old. Anything that you find archaeologically prior to 250,000 years old is something different from a human being. they might have a connection, but they're Nephilim or they're Neanderthals or there's something that they're not Cro-Magnons. The Cro-Magnon is quite a recent Homo sapiens. It's quite a recent biologically evolution.
Okay, but we also have sort of humanity 2.0 here as well. A later version, what we are and what we are, what a lot of people that are coming in now are not humanity per se. They're not that version either.
No, because you have this whole thing about people talking about star childs and deliberate genetic DNA manipulation, which has been going on for years, decades. I mean, in the book here, one of the old book, 79, there was a girl here called Elizabeth, and there was this in East Devon, which is again in the West Country, and she had produced at least one hybrid child, which, you know, this hybridization of introducing an evolution of DNA has been going on, maybe only in small part, but it has been going on for a very long time. I think on the Earth there are elements that are in contradiction to each other. There are, if you want, positives, where they are concerned with the maintaining of the biosphere and the evolution of the culture, the evolution of the human race, the evolution of nature in general, and the protection of it. And then you also have a very exploitive, parasitic element, which is originally perhaps ET, but is very much grounded here and has been feeding in many different ways off of the human race for a very, very long time.
So the Draco, the reptilians, the Greys.
I don't want to particularly, I've said before, I don't particularly want to put names on them because it's a little bit like trying to classify people as Asiatic or African or whatever.
Okay.
It's too general.
Sure.
I have nothing against reptiles. Reptiles can be very, very focused and very, very, even in nature, if you've got an iguana, they can be quite intelligent. Their eye doesn't blink very much, but they can be quite sensitive. I have a great relationship with nature. I can talk to horses and cats and things like that. But, let me say that I wouldn't cliche, it's the Dracos, it's the reptilians. I would say there are elements, like in human society, which are very negative, very parasitic, very exploitive, extremely, I would say, as Buzz Aldrin said recently when he went to Antarctica, evil.
Right.
And it's a word I've never really used until the last 2 years, where I've actually come across and identified evil, because I try to be very eclectic in my understanding of religion and philosophy. And I would never have used that before. But regretfully now, with the new transparency and lots of things hitting the fan, it saddens me to see the amount of evil that is out there, has been going on for years.
Right. So you've brought up Antarctica, fascinating subject. And obviously, John Kerry went there during our election, which was a very noticeable departure at a strategic time. And so what do you have to say about Antarctica? What do you know? What can you say?
I can say what I suspect, because I've never been to Antarctica.
Right.
What we know, and we do know this, is that the German Nazi regime, even prior to the Second World War, was extraordinarily interested in all kinds of things, including ancient religions and the Ark of the Covenant, and went down to Antarctica and did establish submarine bases and things down there, even before the beginning of 1939. They actually were into that. Plus, they were into anti-gravity research prior to the Second World War. The problem, if I might divert for a second, that they couldn't get a handle on with the anti-gravity research is they did produce vehicles, but the vehicles could not carry weapons. They were very light, and they have to be rounded, if I might use this as an example. Literally a flying saucer. The point is, it has no point at which the electrostatic energy will spur off. So the shape is inherently designed to handle EHT, extremely high tension electricity. Once you stick a gun on it, you ruin the drive system. You cannot run a gun on a UFO. The UFOs themselves do have defense systems, but they're energetic. They don't fire bullets. And so if you see a picture of a Nazi UFO with a gun sticking off it, it's probably a fake, because the drive system wouldn't allow it to happen. Having said that, Base 211, quite a classic, but a lot of research done on that. The areas in Antarctica which are warm due to volcanic activity and vegetation, and in the areas which you're verboten to go to, which were under German control with German names. There are warm areas. There was an English expedition of British Army, who went down there on a survey and found a crevasse, very deep canyon crevasse, down at the bottom of which there was ancient artifacts and some kind of vegetation and animals. They came back all excited. It was immediately classified. Mm-hmm. And no one was allowed to go there again. There's a whole areas of Antarctica which nobody is allowed to go, absolutely verboten for years and years and years.
Why is that?
Why is that? Well, because I think there's something down there very, very serious. People have linked it to German Nazis in some part, maybe to a degree, but I think there is some element of civilization down there which keeps itself very secret. Admiral Byrd, isn't it?
Byrd, yes.
Yeah, who was very senior explorer, took down high jump. Was it high jump?
Yes.
And came back in 6 or 7 weeks. They had their arse kicked. Lost aircraft, lost ships, lost 2 ships, lost men. Came back with a strange story, which was immediately again classified. And nobody went down there again until recently. It would seem, and this is only a suspicion, it would seem that various people have been going down there to make some kind of negotiation, and mostly been told to go away. Go away. We don't want to deal with you. Please, go away. This includes the Russians, the Americans, various other people.
What about the telescope down there?
The South Pole installation has been principally there for looking for Planet X.
So you do agree with that? That's what it's doing.
Comes up from the southern side of the hemisphere of the sun,
right,
and the Earth, and they have a huge installation down there, which is mostly under the ice to keep it out of the way of the bad weather, and a facility on the surface, and they have a very, very powerful infrared telescope down there.
So are you party to what they find down there using the
Only
telescope?
Partially. My compartments were compartments. A lot of my information is out of date because I'm now 70. I would say that 90% of what you hear about Planet X is not right. It's not correct information. Either it's misidentification or it's deliberately misinformation.
Well, what do you understand Planet X to be exactly?
I understand that after Sitchin, who did a lot of translation of Sumerian
tablets,
cuneiform text, that there is definitively a situation which occurs every several thousand years, maybe 3,600 years, where something happens where there's either perhaps a ninth planet or a ninth object, let's put it this way. In the galaxy, the normal state is solar, 2 suns or even 3 suns. Very, very few singular suns. In fact, almost unknown. So if you say here is Sol, our sun, you can say, well, it's got to have a companion. It might be a long way away, and it might be of a different class of object, but it's almost got to have a companion.
Definitely.
And when you see movements of planets that are being disturbed in their orbit, particularly over the last 15 years, where you can't say, well, this is due to Saturn or Jupiter or Neptune or Uranus, then you say, well, what's causing that disturbance? What's causing that situation? Mm-hmm. And definitively there is something, even NASA has said this, but there is definitively a something out there. Now, some people will say it's a long way away and it won't make any difference. Other people say it's like inboard. But the general feeling is that there is a solar object and it has 5 planets, and these planets have moons, and above all it has a huge dust field, a huge dust cloud, debris. Mm-hmm. And part of that debris field, because it is huge, is already impacting the Earth, causing heavier rain, because rain is water vapor that precipitates around a dust particle. So if you increase the dust cloud density, then you get much more severe torrential rain, which can be very damaging. And there's all kinds of predictions about, well, an object is already in. People keep photographing lens flares and things and trying to grab a bit of web time and say, hey, I just photographed Planet X. Most of them are not correct, and people don't understand refraction as things come over the horizon at sunset. But having said that, if you look at all the data, there's a lot in it, but to pin it down and say when, where, how, or where is extraordinarily difficult. There was pictures of an object that came in and is still out there with its classic wings, which is where we get some of the Egyptian iconography. Maat, M-A-A-T, refers to this as the Mesopotamian legends refer to it. It's like trying to grab fog. There's so much information that most of it is not right. So to find out what's right and what's not right, and the people who really, really know are not going to tell you.
Right. Okay. So have you heard about a Dyson sphere? Clark McClellan talks about something he was told. You know who he is, right?
You go on.
He worked for NASA during the Apollo. He was, I guess, an engineer, but he was party to a lot of things. He met. He accidentally stumbled on basically seeing some what are in essence Anunnaki directing our astronauts up on the space station. He saw that on closed circuit TV, I guess, down in Florida. At one point, I've interviewed him a number of times. He's a very interesting man. He's quite old at this point. He's in poor health, but he has talked about a Dyson sphere that is towing something along with it. Now, I don't know if that's a completely other, because I have witnesses that also talk about we have, planets are used as vehicles, planetoids. So there's that some of this is also could be a planetoid.
My first observation of plans of using an asteroid or a geological body as a transit vehicle or a station, I first looked at in 1958, believe it or not. It came from Douglas Bader, who was a British aviation ace in the war. It's a very old idea. It's been around a long time. A lot of things that you look at that have had micro impacts that look pretty beaten up, like Phobos and Deimos, could well be operating stations.
No doubt about it.
Their density is very low. They got to be hollow. One of them has a great big indentation on the back, which could be some kind of drive mechanism. They have both been mined. They've been strip mined on the surface. And one of the old plans was using rock and using the source of the body for a source of minerals and anything else you want to drag out of it. I mean, out of even dry rock, you can get water, believe it or not. There's always an element of water involved.
Well, we've been told that Phobos, for example, is a command and control center, and that it is hollow. And we've also been told that the moon has been parked in place. So the moon itself is one such body.
One of the things that's startled me is, as I've gone on over my decades of research and understanding, is how large and how advanced some of these ancient structures can be. And some of them are derelict. Some of them are in pretty poor state. I mean, I've seen pictures of bases on the other side of the moon and structures on the other side of the moon. A lot of it is derelict. A lot of it is very old and is not in use now. We didn't do it in the last 10, 15 years. It could be, I mean, I'm ballparking, but it could be 100,000 years ago. And if it's got micro craters on it, which is a certain density of meteoric impact on the moon and other bodies, which you know about, you can say, hey, that's been there for a long time.
Sure.
The clear thing that's come out of all the research, and this you can put money on this, is that in this solar system, there has been interstellar activity and civilization for an incredible amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking at least 450,000 years. And that's based on data. That's not based on a guess.
Right.
There was definitively a very high civilization on Mars. And it's a fact, regrettably, that you can show that Mars has had a nuclear war. Because you can find on the surface of Mars, not in the rock, but on the surface, isotopes which you only get from a nuclear explosion. They do not occur naturally at all.
Yes.
And you can show that there are two areas to the north and east of Cydonia, and one a little bit nearer, which had two incredible nuclear explosions. When I would like to see data, if anybody wants to try to research this, as to whether the daughter products that have a short half-life, what their density is. Because although you have these long half-lives, if you could find out when the shorter half-lives were, you could say, oh, this happened 18,000 years ago, or this happened 10,000, or 100,000. You could date it, like a carbon dating. I haven't seen that data. It's got to be out there somewhere. Whether NASA would release it, I don't know. But this is stuff that's been brought back from all the Martian probes. And we know that there have been artifacts found on Mars. We know that there's been bacteria found on Mars. We know that the colour of Mars is not as red as they would have you believe, right? So there's this huge disinformation, which is, everything which is the real information is banned and obscured, and the general public is kept into the dark because it would give them a true history of where they came from.
Sure. Well, we're told, we know basically, based on so many witnesses, that there are bases on the moon and Mars, that we have bases there. So how much of the secret space program are you aware of?
I'm more aware of ET than I am of the human element.
Oh, I see.
There is an interaction, unquestionably, with certain ET with human technology. There have been more than one agreement. The Eisenhower meeting is fairly well known. There is more than one ET agenda, more than one ET origin.
All right, well, let me ask you point blank, and
You
don't have to answer if you don't want to, but with your early ET contact, were you not part of some of these negotiations? Have you never been to one of these, I don't know if you know my witness, Mark Richards of the Secret Space Program, who Simon Parkes is actually saying that MI5 will try to get out of jail sometime soon. And that there are supposed to be supposedly some kind of disclosure happening. I just interviewed him a couple days ago, and he said possibly as early as March to June. We're interacting with these beings, and that we've had meetings like the United Nations. He even says, for that matter, that the United Nations is really concerned with our ET contacts. That's really what they're on about and involved in, not so much what goes on here on Earth, although I'm sure
Well, again, I don't think you can generalize, because even at the United Nations, there are many different compartments.
I'm sure.
And it's too big an umbrella to blanket.
But my direct question to you is, again, have you never been part of
I'll
these
be very
negotiations?
frank with you, is that over the decades I have been consulted by ET as to how the hell what goes on down here.
Okay.
I'm as much a spy for them, more so than I am for anything that's gone on here.
Okay.
Because there is this huge disconnect. There is a disconnect historically. When there was the flood, which is in all religions and all legends, there was a period of, we say approximately 4,000 years, when nothing really happened much on the earth. It was devastated. Now, the flood came at the end of a long period of civilization, which was a natural civilization, which produced pyramids and megaliths and all kinds of amazing things, which we really still don't really understand. Although I've got a pretty inside track on how some of them work.
Okay.
But you're like looking at if you took this piece of equipment, this microphone, and you buried it for 10,000 years, a lot of it would degenerate, and you'd be left with maybe the stand, and you'd be left with just the shell. And that's what you've got with a lot of the South American doorways, for example. All of the key bits have gone. You're left with a shell, and you're trying to figure out, well, why is that hole there? Why is that lump there? Why is that like that? You're trying to work out what should have been in the case. But you've only got the case,
right,
because everything else has oxidized or it's been worn away. And it seems to me that there was this long period of time from 450,000 years to the creation of Homo sapiens 250,000 years ago, because they needed workers, helpers, slaves, principally to mine gold, which they do. You can make gold, but it's much easier to dig it out of the ground. And similarly with water. And then that went for a long time, and then something major radical happened. Something major radical happened that swept away. Various pyramids blew up. There was actually pyramids in Egypt and North America and North Africa which disintegrated. They blew their top. They were very much energy devices, and something radically went wrong. There was a major change of climate, floods, debris, total devastation. Now, you could argue, was that natural, Planet X or whatever, or was that some kind of conflict? Was that generated? Because I've been told that when there is in the past, and I'll say in the past optimistically, a planetary difficulty, they use gravimetric forces, they use natural forces they weaponize it.
Right. Well, we know about the sinking of Atlantis that was hit by a targeted meteor, right? So you're talking about this sort of thing.
I'm talking about the fact that it's startling to me that with the technology, which we are not allowed to have here on the Earth, that's why so many things were stopped and suppressed, like Tesla and what have you. Because once you get into anti-gravity and free energy, you then open up Pandora's box. And one of my missions is to keep the human race on the Earth. You're not allowed to go anywhere. You're too dangerous.